that's what we're trying to have is instead of trying to seek safety out there by other people's approval and everybody else being okay with me, I've realized I cannot create internal safety, which is what I really want, by focusing out there. I have to focus in here. I feel safe inside. And because I've created the safety inside and I reinforce it on a regular basis, you can't get inside me and mess that up. Only I can
Mhm.
because I'm the one that creates it and recreates it. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12 Step Recovery. If you're tired of feeling fragmented, emotionally overwhelmed, stuck in people pleasing, approval seeking, overthinking, or losing yourself in relationships, you're in the right place. This podcast is about recovery for real life. Through honest stories, practical tools, and lessons I've learned through 12-step recovery, boundaries work, and over 4 decades of personal growth, we explore what it actually takes to stop abandoning yourself and build a life that feels more authentic, grounded, and whole. We'll talk about things like boundaries, shame, family dysfunction, reparenting, emotional regulation, self-trust, recovery, and creating internal safety so you can stay connected to yourself even when life gets hard. I'm a boundaries coach, speaker, author, and woman in recovery, and my approach is raw, honest, practical, and sometimes a little bit, a lot, sweary. I'm also an avid beachcomber. My hands are basically always cold, so I wear fingerless gloves most of the year. And I still get weirdly excited when I spot license plates with my initials BN. I don't speak for or represent any particular 12-step fellowship, though I'm deeply grateful for the role recovery has played in my life. If you're ready for real talk, emotional healing, and practical tools to help you go from fragmented to whole, keep listening. This is episode 361, How Recovery and Boundaries Changed One Woman's Relationship with Herself. So this episode is going to be completely different than anything I have ever done before. So I do have a guest, but it's not my typical guest episode where they share their experience, strength, and hope of recovery. There will be some of that, of course, but this is really a conversation between me and Ilene. So I met Ilene 5 years ago when she became my private boundaries coaching client. And she found me through my podcast, and we have been in touch ever since. In fact, I actually got to meet her, what was that, a couple years ago that you were up in New York? And
2 years ago.
2 years ago. So she was in New York. I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and she took the train here and stayed over. And I'm not intending to share the video, but I might share clips. So you might see that I'm literally recording from my bed. And she was like, I know where you are because she slept here and I slept on the couch. But in any case, the reason that we decided to do this is that I think it was last week, maybe the week before, she contacted me and said, I just listened to your most recent podcast. I took a bunch of notes. I'm going to share them. And she sent me this email and it said something like notes on episode 357, maybe also 356. So I just want to name those episodes. So 357 is why you keep ignoring your own preferences and what to do instead. And 356 was how to stop managing other people's reactions and feel safer inside. And Ilene put 10 different points on there and talked about like a thing that I shared in those episodes and then what happened in her life or how that resonated in her life. And I was like, holy shit. And I'm pretty sure when I left her a voice memo, those were probably my first words. Holy shit. Like, I mean, so many things am I holy shitting about. One, there's so much that she shared that was really deep. Two, she wrote it down. And three, she took the time to write it down and share it with me. And I did what I often do with stuff that like I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, is I run it through ChatGPT and I'm like, give me ideas of what to do with this. And it was like, well, it seems like you should record a podcast. And I was like, I might have already thought of that. I don't really know. And so I reached out to her and we decided we were going to do it, and we had a conversation about it. So I this is going to be a much longer episode than it normally is. But I have a bunch of questions. I don't want to ask them like bop, 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 bop like that. But, we're hoping to cover a lot of territory. So I would like to have Eileen introduce herself in whatever way she wants. And then I'm going to start with questions and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Barb. My name is Eileen. I'm 61 years old. And when Barb asked me to be on her podcast, I was very excited. I do have a recovery story, but I think the most impactful thing about Barb's podcast are the number of people I have shared it with over the years who are not in recovery and how helpful it's been to them.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, it was actually this summer, five years ago this summer, and I remember specifically you coached with me over the summer because you're a teacher.
Mhm.
And when you went back to school in September, this has carved into me. I will never forget. You said to me, I have so much more energy at the end of the day and at the end of the week than I ever did before because I'm not absorbing other people's emotions. And I just never forgot that. So, what was happening in your life when we met and like why you reached out to me for coaching?
So my divorce was final in the spring of 2021.
Okay, so right before.
Yes, and I had
Okay.
been in Al-Anon recovery for about a year and a half at that point. And I discovered your podcast. I don't know, I'm a librarian. I'm really good at Googling things, and it came up.
Hmm.
So I discovered it probably in the spring of 2021. And then that summer, which is the first summer I had off of school after my divorce, I was really rebuilding my life from the ground up. And I was really trying to rediscover and redefine who I was and what I wanted my life to look like. I
Hmm.
had gone through a lot of changes in a very short period of time. My sons were mostly out of the house, so I wasn't a full-time mom. I was divorced. It was in the middle of a pandemic. And for the first time in over 20 years, um, I wasn't living in a near constant state of fear or waiting for something bad to happen. So it was just a very different way of living, and I wasn't really sure how to do it.
Hmm. I kind of I didn't remember that you had like so many transitions going on, but one of the things that I think is really common with my clients is they're in some kind of transition. So they're becoming empty nesters. They're thinking of divorcing. They're newly divorced. They are about to retire. They're switching their career, something like that. And, I think boundaries are really about our identity. And when our identity is shifting, we often need support. So that's good. I kind of didn't realize that. So what did you think that you needed help with?
Um, so I had, through my recovery work prior to our coaching, which at that time point was almost 2 years, I started to understand how I had abandoned myself over and over again to maintain my marriage and keep my family together.
Hmm.
And for the first time in decades, I had full control of my life. And I knew it was an opportunity, but it was a little scary. And it was also, and I was still carrying a lot of grief because I had a lot of grief that I had kind of stuffed down, and it didn't all come out at once. It came out a little bit at a time. So I
Hmm.
had grief about what I lost, grief about my kids growing up, grief about how my marriage ended. Um, and it's one thing to kind of have all this turmoil for years, but to have language for it and to understand it, it's just a lot to take in.
Hmm.
And through my recovery work and your podcast and all of the things that you shared about your own life, I thought you could help me create boundaries for this new phase of my life. And
Okay.
it wasn't just, it was like everything from how I spent my time, who I stayed connected to. And I could be intentional this time instead of reacting.
Yeah, okay. So in ACA, we say become an actor rather than a reactor.
Exactly.
So, do you remember in your mind how you understood or what you were telling yourself about why things were so fucking hard?
At that time, I was still trying to make sense of everything. And I was trying to, one of the things you learn in recovery is how to name things. And so
Mm,
I was starting to get names for things that I didn't understand. And I know that there were patterns of behavior that were repeated over and over again that I didn't understand, but I had to manage or compensate for them. And there was a lot of we had a business, and there was a lot of financial risk and stress, which intensified everything. And I couldn't control everything, and I became this controlling person that tried to control everything I could. And I just knew that wasn't the person I really was.
hmm So you said you like recovery helped you name a bunch of things. Can you think of some examples of things that you were able to name like early on?
Resentment. I didn't know that the feelings I had were named resentment.
Okay.
Um, uh, I knew fear, I knew anxiety. I didn't understand manipulation, what that was, and what it looked like. Um, I didn't understand things like when someone tells you who they are, believe them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not taking things personally.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was a sensitive person, but I didn't realize that that was, I could be sensitive, but also not take things personally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Black and white thinking, and I learned about distorted thinking because I started to realize how distorted my thinking had become.
Yeah. Okay. So did you think that there was something like inherently wrong with you, Eileen?
Yes, definitely. And when I worked the steps the first time, it was really hard not to beat myself up because there were just so many things that I'd done wrong. Because I became a perfectionist too. So I always tried to do the right thing. And then I come to realize that actually I had done all these things wrong.
Mm,
And it took me a while to kind of forgive myself and understand why I did them.
mhm,
But I asked myself things like, how did I end up in this situation? I thought I was a smart person. Why didn't I trust what I was seeing? Why did I stay in this situation? And I had a lot of guilt around feeling like I let my kids down by not being able to fix things, even though I learned that in a relationship, both people have to want to fix it. I never was able to fix it by myself.
mhm,
And I had a lot of self criticism.
mhm,
Um, but I do have to say that, I think that a lot of people just avoid dealing with those things because they're really painful. And I feel grateful that I was able to face them because that's what allowed me to grow.
mm. Yeah, as we say in recovery, there is no healing without feeling. Like if you go
Yep.
the rest of your life numbing shit, then and without feeling them, you're not going to have a well-lived life.
No.
So when you first started coaching with me, what were you expecting boundary work to look like?
I think at that time I still was looking at recovery and everything in more of a intellectual way. Like I could read all the things, but it really does take a while for the feelings part of it to soak in.
Hmm
So I remember seeing it as an understanding of where I ended and someone else began, which was learning how to have healthy relationships with myself and other people.
hmm
And it allowed me to I realized as I started doing it that it applied to not just recovering from my marriage, but with many other relationships, with my mother, with my work, lots of things.
Okay. And like, at what point did you come to understand that ultimately this was about your relationship with yourself?
I mean, you learn in recovery from the very beginning, keep the focus on yourself, keep the focus on yourself. And you talk about that a lot in your podcast.
Hmm
But when you haven't been focusing on yourself for so long, it's hard to do that, and it takes a while to do that. And so, even with the boundaries work, I think it took me a while to really, really understand what that meant for me.
Hmm. Yeah, and I find that is true for so many of my clients
Hmm.
that they can hear those words, keep the focus on yourself, and then they're telling me a scenario. And I'm like, well, let's bring the focus back to you. Let's bring the focus back to you. Or I'm asking you about you and you're telling me about them as a way to get them to like keep pointing the arrow towards themselves instead of externally. And it was super hard for me too.
Yes.
But this is one reason why having someone, whether it's a coach or a sponsor or a therapist or something like that, helping you to keep bringing the focus back to yourself is really helpful.
And I think also when you're living in a certain way, you lose your sense of self-worth, you
Hmm.
lose your identity, and so all of those things make it hard to focus on
Hmm.
yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like selfish and wrong.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I hear that.
Yep.
So, one of the things that you wrote in that 10-point email that you sent to me was that for years you adapted yourself to maintain connection. And I know that I don't know that I used that same exact language, but I was talking about that in one of those episodes, and I think you were responding like, yes, me too. So, what did it look like for you to adapt yourself to maintain connection to other people?
Okay, so I know you're really comfortable revealing personal information on your podcast. This is still a little uncomfortable for me,
So
but
don't do anything that's uncomfortable. Please don't.
no,
Yeah.
no. I think it's
Yeah.
important for people um to see this because when I was in the middle of this, I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
So when I was married, when I would try to hold my then husband accountable for something that affected me, his response would be angry, yelling, and or often a threat to leave. And when I say that now, it doesn't have any emotional trigger, but when I was in the middle of it and I was already living in fear, that was really scary. And I realized that it triggered a very deep, almost primal fear, partly because I was dependent on him at the time, and
Mhm.
partly because I had experiences that were similar growing up. And I think my nervous system um, that was familiar. And so
Mhm.
in order to make that fear go away, I would immediately take responsibility for things that weren't mine. I would
Mhm.
fix things, or I would stop bringing them up just to restore some sense of stability, but they wouldn't
Mhm.
go away. And
Yeah.
sometimes there were serious implications. And I
Yeah.
didn't even understand this pattern um, until I was explaining it to a friend of mine, and she told me what it was. And I also now it was hard. One of the things that's horrifying in recovery is just to learn how my behavior in reaction to that was so bad
Mhm.
because I was showing up as a person that I wouldn't now even recognize because I had so
Mm.
much resentment and fear.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think, you're pointing at something like I say, for me, the greatest gift of recovery was understanding my part in things. And
Hmm.
even though it sucks to learn shitty things about yourself, what you see is you have way more, the ability to have way more control over your life than you ever thought that you did. And when you realize, oh, wait, I'm the problem here. This is not about self-deprecation. This is about self-empowerment. Because if I'm the problem, then I get to be the solution. But if everybody around me is really the problem, I'm screwed. There's
Yeah.
nothing I can do about that. And then you also said that it was almost primal. I would say it actually was primal because what you're talking about without having named it in this particular little segment here is the abandonment wound. And
Hmm.
one of the in the ACA Big Red Book, that's our ACA fellowship text, it also calls it the soul wound. So it is an actually a primal wound. But you didn't know that was going on. And so this is what many of us do. We adapt ourselves so that we can stay connected to others because we believe my connection to them is tied to my safety. I will not be safe if I'm not connected to them.
Hmm.
And so we do all kinds of things, including violating our own values, violating things that are like you would think would be self-preservation
Hmm.
because we think that's what we need to be safe.
Hmm. Yep.
All right. So you also said that you're creating a social life that fits you. And I know I had given some examples too in there. So what does that mean for you now? Can you give a few examples of like how does your social life fit you now in ways that it didn't used to?
Um, I have created a life that feels peaceful but not boring. I have long-term friendships. I've met a lot of new people. And because I have a better understanding of myself, I probably seek out different types of people.
Hmm.
And I spend time doing things I really enjoy. I started biking. I have a dog. Um, I do some hiking. Um, I read. I'm a librarian, and for a long time I just couldn't read. My brain just would not allow me to read, so I read now. And I've also gotten clearer about what works for me and what doesn't. Um, I lived for a long time in an environment that seemed very much centered around alcohol. And I might have a drink occasionally, but it's not the center of my social life. So I'm more intentional about the environments I'm in and the people I spend time with.
Hmm.
Um, and I think now I used to spend so much time and energy managing chaos, preventing things from going wrong or fixing things. And now I have kind of a peace and steadiness so that when something does happen unexpected, because that's just life, it's not such a big deal. And I think you've described that phenomenon. And I can't remember the words you use, but I know I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah. So besides not like centering your social life around alcohol, can you
Mhm.
give us a couple of examples of things that you used to do in your social life that you just don't anymore because you realize they don't really fit you, they don't feel right to you?
Um, it's not so much, I might still do them, but I think I used to feel more like an outsider when I was doing them, like parties and things like that. And I
Okay.
think now I can go to those same parties and feel like what I think is more important than what all the other people think.
Oh, okay, good. One of my
Yes, I
favorite
know. I
transitions.
know. That's a
Yeah.
big one. And not, yeah, because I think sometimes I would be in these environments where I just felt like I was in high school and everybody was drinking and I didn't, I just drank sometimes, but I just didn't think it was such a big deal.
Hmm.
And drinking is such a big part of our culture and
Hmm.
not just in my world, but
Hmm.
and so I think I am more intentional about surrounding myself with people who live the way I live. And that's especially true the older I've gotten because I think there are more and more people who are recognizing that, alcohol is just not good for us as we age.
Yeah. So you also shared a story about finally visiting a Frank Lloyd Wright's house. I'd love for you to share that story and why that was meaningful for you.
So one of the things that I learned in recovery, and again, it was something that I experience, but I didn't have a name for, is that I was always, not always, but constantly on and off managing the emotional environment around me of my parents. And it's not to criticize my parents, but back then people just did what they could, and we didn't have mental health treatment and all that stuff, but they didn't always handle their emotions in the healthiest of ways.
Hmm.
And so I learned that when I'm constantly focused on, why is my father yelling? What did I do? How do I get him to stop yelling? How do I make my mother happy so she's not mad at me? That you never really develop a strong sense of what you actually enjoy. And so I learned about Frank Lloyd Wright when I was in college because I studied the environment and His houses, incorporate nature, and I always found that fascinating. And I've been to Chicago, I lived in Ohio, I was near some of his beautiful houses, and I never went to look at them. And so I went to Chicago recently to reconnect with some childhood friends, and we visited his studio and his home and his other famous house, and they had never done it either. And so not only was I able to do something, allowed myself to do something that was really meaningful to me, it actually was really meaningful to them too. So it was just an all around great experience.
So I would call that like discovering your real identity, which is promise number one in ACA. Like you're a woman who really enjoys Frank Lloyd Wright and wants to go experience
Mhm.
his work, not just read about it and learn about it and think about it, but actually experience it.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we were talking the other day in preparation for this, one of the things you said was that you and your ex-husband were living in two completely different realities. Can you tell folks what you meant by that?
Okay, so again, very personal stuff, but very helpful because understanding this was really important. And between getting to a safe place and understanding it, I got to a much higher level of forgiveness.
Mm,
That's why I feel like it's important to talk about,
mhm,
especially for people who think they're never going to get to forgiveness because it keep working at it. So from the outside, it might have looked like we had the same life. We were parents, we were running a business, we had kids, but there was a disconnect. And I was living in a reality where I'm logical, things need to make sense, actions have consequences, I'm very responsible. The goal should be stability, financial stability, emotional stability. I was constantly organizing and planning and creating a structure so that all of the things I was trying to do in my life, which were really not possible for me to do, but I thought they were. And I just wanted my kids to be okay. I wanted my kids to have a good life. And I didn't, yeah, I wanted them to have a good life. And so his personality was more impulsive, less grounded. There wasn't this kind of understanding of between decisions and outcomes. And there was not always responsibility. I didn't have a name for that until later when I figured it out. And so what was obvious to me was not obvious to him. And I think the biggest thing that came out of it that helped me with forgiveness is the difference between intention and impact. Because I now understand that a person might not intend to do hurtful things or harmful things or irresponsible things,
mhm,
but the impact is that those things were
mhm,
harmful or
mm,
scary or whatever. And
mhm.
that's the most important thing. And when you don't care about the impact or understand the impact or want to understand the impact, then that creates a problem in a relationship.
Yeah, agreed. And that's been a really powerful concept for me too. In fact, I know that I have a podcast episode about that, which hopefully I'll remember to link in here. And I talk about how like your intentions matter to you because we're trying to practice these principles in all our affairs when we live in recovery. So we want to be mindful of how we're living our lives. But nobody else gives a shit about your intentions if your impact is negative. And where I really learned this is in anti-racism work. So if you do or say something that is in its impact is racist towards a person of color, they don't give a fuck what your intentions are. All they know is you've impacted me. And the work is to repair the damage. And then once the damage is repaired, so you make amends, do whatever you need to do, maybe you can start to talk about your intentions. But what a lot of white people do is go right to the intention and ignore the impact entirely. And, when we're in recovery, like I'll talk about myself. If this was me, I'm the one who's in recovery. My person who has had this negative impact on me is not in recovery. So I get to pay attention to their intention. I don't negate the impact that they had on me. I don't say that it was okay. So one way that I talk about this is, I have way more compassion for my parents as a result of my recovery. They literally did the best they could. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough, but I'm not going to hold them accountable for that because they couldn't do any better. So their intention was not to create a dysfunctional family, but the impact was that they did. So I forgive them, but also it was not okay. So I really appreciate you saying that, and it really helped me. And I think that that intention versus impact is what allowed me to have the compassion, which
Mhm.
I think is imperative for forgiveness, for sure.
Yep. Yes. And when I said forgiveness, I kind of feel like compassion and forgiveness go hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know I did a lot of work on forgiveness for years, and most of it, all the reading I did was like, you should forgive and why, but none of it was how. And it wasn't until I read The Wisdom of Forgiveness by the Dalai Lama, and he talks about forgiveness. And we also learn that in recovery too, that very frequently we need to do a lot of forgiveness work before we can make amends with people, because if we have resentment against them, we're not going to make a true amends,
Yes.
you know?
And the other thing that came out of this too is I've also worked on my relationship with my mother, and I remember explaining to her something about, it wasn't so much about intention and impact, but it was about relationship rupture and
Mm,
how important it is to acknowledge it and to talk about it. And if you need to make amends, because
mhm.
that's what builds intimacy and trust.
Yes.
And if you never talk about it, then that's you get resentful because it never gets discussed. And she thanked me for saying that, but she's in her 80s and she didn't understand that. And I didn't understand that was such a fundamental belief that I had. I didn't maybe name it, but it was just a fundamental belief. And it was, I think, a little shocking to me that someone didn't understand that. But now I realize that a lot of people don't understand that. So,
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the Gottman Institute.
uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
do
so
now.
they
Yep.
talk about like the most important part of any relationship is the repair part. Everybody's going to have conflict, but what do you do after the conflict? And
Yep.
repair is
Yep.
the thing that is going to preserve relationships.
Yeah.
And that,
But
like, they can watch a video of a couple and in 7 minutes they can determine whether these people are going to make it or not. And it's contempt is the quality that if there's contempt, you're pretty much doomed, you know?
yes, and but to repair, both people need to have the capacity to
Right.
take responsibility.
Yes,
And
yes,
not everyone
absolutely.
has the capacity to do that.
Right. But also we can learn to build the capacity, which is what recovery does, you
Yeah,
know?
if you choose, if you think
Right.
it's a problem, like not
Yes.
everybody thinks
Right.
that's a
Right.
problem.
Agreed.
Yes,
Right. Right.
yes.
Exactly. So one expression that you used in our conversation the other day was living in quote crazy town. So what changed?
So my Al-Anon work, and I think this is true just in recovery in general, and I think I mentioned this already, but it allowed me to name what I was dealing with. And it also taught me how to detach and not react to everything that was said to me. So once I did that, I started to be able to separate myself from being in the middle of it all.
Okay.
And I learned to hear things without taking them personally. And I
Hmm.
started to trust my my own perception of something without trying to explain it to the other person and
Hmm.
trying to get them to agree with me. And it was like I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just kind of knew what was true for me.
Hmm.
And I think one of the Al Anon daily reader books is called Courage to Change. And so I think once I got to a place of feeling safe enough, I was able to have the courage to do things differently. Um, and
So you, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that my 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 ex-husband used to call himself Captain Chaos, like it was something to be proud of. And so I laugh at that now because, that's kind of the essence of Crazy Town. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned in there, which I love, is that you started to trust your own perception.
hmm
So how do you know like when that started to happen for you and what that was like when you trusted your own perception over other people's?
Yeah, that started like pretty early on in my Al-Anon work. Um, and it's hard to explain how it works because I don't know. It's kind of magical.
Hmm.
But going to enough meetings, getting a sponsor, working the steps, all those things, it's
Hmm.
like you just exhale and some of that fear starts to go away and you start to be able to kind of
Hmm.
think for yourself and not be so
Hmm.
um, m- and not just react to the other person's behavior.
Hmm. Yeah, my guess is that keeping the focus on yourself has a lot to do with that because when you're entirely focused externally and you're always trying to prevent problems, you
hmm
don't even have time for your own
No.
perception. And when someone is constantly telling you whatever it is, like you're being too serious, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, that's not what happened, you start to question your own perception. And I know for me, the worst impact of growing up in dysfunction was questioning my own perception.
hmm
Because
Yep.
how do you have like healthy relationships and a well-lived life when you don't even like believe your own perception? And especially when you're a child, because when you're a kid, you don't even understand how the world works. So
Right.
I don't know how the world works, and then I also question my own perception. How can I possibly have a high
Yeah.
quality life when that's happening? So, what happens for you today when somebody disagrees with you or sees something differently than you do?
Um, well, it doesn't destabilize me in the way it used to.
Good word.
Um,
Good word. Yeah.
um, but I'm also kind of not legally connected to anyone that's going to impact my life.
Hmm.
So I'm more cautious about who I let into my life.
Hmm.
Um, I can let I mean, I've always been an open-minded person. My brother and I have very different political views, and we don't talk about politics, and we have a really good relationship. So I think if someone disagrees with me, I don't take it personally, and I just, it's not about me, and I can still like the person for the many things that they are, and
Hmm.
that's okay.
Yeah. And I think, basically, what's going on in our society right now, that quality is so important because what I've heard from a bunch of different quarters, and I do not pay attention to politics, the news, or current events, but this stuff still seeps into my consciousness that what's happening nowadays is people only want to be around people who agree with them. And if they don't, then they cut them off. And I
Yeah.
remember hearing this guy actually Ted Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies talk about how, like, in years past, it didn't matter whether you agreed with your neighbor or not. If their barn needed raising, you went over and helped them because that's how community works. You don't have to agree with everybody. But nowadays, people act like because you don't agree with me, you're
Mhm.
not my community member anymore. And we need more and more of us not taking things personally, not feeling like my way is the right way.
Yep. And that's another example how recovery helps in all your affairs.
Yeah, absolutely. I named something that you didn't name before, the abandonment wound, and you talked about being primal,
hmm
and you hinted at that it didn't start with your marriage, but I want to hear like you abandoning yourself
Mhm.
um in your marriage.
Mhm.
How do you understand that that was really not the first time, that it was a pattern that you had and it just got exacerbated in your marriage? Can you talk about that?
Um, I started to notice as I started to learn about all these things, the pattern of the relationship I had with my mother, who's still living, and I appreciate very much that she's still living because I've been able to work on that relationship in my own way. And she is, there were a lot of similarities in those two relationships.
Okay.
And what I noticed about her is that she would want me to do something or want me to think like her or something. And if I didn't, she would either say mean things about me to my brother, or she wouldn't talk to me, or she'd be very short when I called her. And I would basically repair the relationship. I wouldn't necessarily apologize, but I would draw her back in and then we'd never talk about it.
Hmm.
And I was able to recognize that dynamic and stop doing it.
Love it.
And so our relationship has changed a lot because I've changed. She has not changed at all. I mean, she
Mhm.
has a little bit because she's responded to my
Mhm.
boundaries and my different way of being. And a few months ago, she asked me if I thought our relationship was better because I was divorced. And I said, no, I think our relationship is better because I went to Al-Anon. And she didn't say anything because she's just not really interested. She doesn't have a curiosity about that. But she said something to my brother about it. And her agenda was that she just wanted to make sure that it wasn't her fault, that it was my problem. And that's why I
Oh,
needed to go to Al-Anon.
okay.
And
Got
a couple years ago, I would have been so angered by that. And
it.
so I would have taken it personally. I would have been hurt. And
Mhm.
my brother and I just laughed at it. Like I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah,
So that was
absolutely.
huge. That was huge. That was a big one.
Yeah. So it sounds like the way that you just described what happened with your mom was you learned I can still be connected to my mom without abandoning myself.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, it gets more and more, it gets stronger because I think one of the hardest concepts in recovery to learn for me is detachment with love.
Hmm.
So I'm still working on that.
Right. So it's not detachment while cursing them.
Or
Yeah.
detachment like a wall and just
Right,
being
right. Completely
unemotional.
cutting them
Yes.
off. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
It,
did have
yeah.
another question in there and I already forgot what it was. Maybe it'll come back to me, maybe it won't.
Okay.
So you have listened to my podcast for years, and like I will tell you that Eileen reaching out to me about episodes 356 and 357 are not the first time that she has reached out to me. She definitely will say, that was an excellent episode and all that stuff. And I personally have given her the moniker as my number one fan. And she said to me, should I tell them I'm the president of your fan club? I go, you can, but you're also in a one member fan club. So of course you're the president because I don't have an official fan club. But anyway, so you've listened to the podcast for a long time. Are there one or two ideas that permanently changed how you see yourself that you learned from the podcast?
Well, I care more about what I think than what other people think.
Okay.
Um, I can make a mistake or set a boundary and not die.
Love it. Didn't
They'll
I?
be
Yeah.
okay. Yep. And then I'm no better or no worse than anyone else.
Mm.
Which is humility, but it's humility. I think it's a different perspective of humility for me, but that's basically what that is.
Yeah, good. Yeah, those are all foundational to me too.
Mhm.
So, can you share some ideas that you learned from the podcast that really took a long time for you to grasp and really integrate and understand?
I think that one about emotional boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and having boundaries with someone who has hurt you,
Mm-hmm.
even if it wasn't intentional, and still have compassion for them. And understanding that it's not really about you, it's really about their lack of capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And that not taking things personally, I usually don't, but sometimes I do. And so that's something that's taken a while. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that concept of internal safety that you've been talking about, I think I realized in the last year I was in a situation where I realized I still didn't have that. And it's weird because your podcast about it came out at like just the perfect time. And it really allowed me to work through that. And I came out in a much stronger place and a much better sense of internal safety. And I think once again, it's about naming that feeling
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
how important it is to be able to have a name for stuff.
Yeah, and frankly, that's exactly what happened to me. It was sometime last year. I'm pretty sure I was guesting on someone else's podcast, and I went, "Oh my God, building healthy boundaries is about creating a sense of internal safety." It was
Mhm.
something that I was like swirling around, but had never named. And once I named it, it was like I put my stake in the ground. I was like, oh, this is called internal safety. And once I named it, it's like it had this ripple effect. And I retroactively understood like everything else that I'm doing in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm talking about it so much now because I've named it and that's what we're going for. That's what we're trying to have is instead of trying to seek safety out there by other people's approval and everybody else being okay with me, I've realized I cannot create internal safety, which is what I really want, by focusing out there. I have to focus in here. And for me, I built that not knowing what it was that I built. And so one of the things I've told people is that there's something that happens over time when you build boundaries, whereby it's almost like there's this energetic force field that develops around you so other people's shit doesn't leak into you. And
Mm-hmm.
now I still think that's true in some regard. I don't know how to explain it, but what I think that means is I feel safe inside. And because I've created the safety inside and I reinforce it on a regular basis, you can't get inside me and mess that up. Only I can
Mm-hmm.
because I'm the one that creates it and recreates it. It takes time,
Yes, it
for
does.
sure.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you heard years ago on the podcast that just clicked kind of recently?
Well, that internal safety thing, but that was kind of recent.
Mhm.
I think, um, I mean, there's just so many things. I go back and listen to episodes sometimes over and over again because I think I think your podcast is so helpful because not everyone is going to do recovery work. Not everyone needs to, but the benefits of what you learn are applicable to so many life
Mhm.
situations.
Agreed. Yeah.
I and you talk about this a lot, but that the concept of distorted thinking,
Mhm.
because I mean, when I first started the work, my thinking was so distorted, and I realized that, and I still realize that I have distorted thinking over some things.
Mhm.
I,
Yeah.
I think that, you accumulate all these distorted thoughts from early on in your life,
Mhm.
and unless you don't realize it, you think that's just how you think and it's who you are. And I
Mhm.
think doing this work, you start to realize, and the more you listen to and the more things you can name, you
Mhm.
realize that your thoughts are not really true. They're distorted thinking, and you don't
Mhm.
have to keep them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like when I started to realize like, holy shit, just because I think something doesn't mean it's true was like,
Uh-huh.
what?
Mhm.
And then, I've heard, I think Brooke Castillo was the first person I heard say a belief is a thought that you've thought over and over again that you've come to believe it's true. And I think that's true. But I also think that beliefs are fed to us as children
Yeah.
that we
Mhm.
just absorb and internalize and assume that they're true because the authority tells us or the culture tells us.
Yes.
And so we have this distorted thinking and distorted beliefs. And, one of the really, really helpful phrases I learned early in recovery, I wouldn't even call it a slogan, is I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am responsible for my second thought and for what comes out of my mouth. And in
Mhm.
ACA, step one is we're powerless over the effects of growing up in dysfunction. And the number one effect is distorted thinking.
Mhm.
And so I'm powerless. I'm going to have distorted thoughts. I just can spot them now and understand I'm not going to act on that thought
Mhm. Yep.
anymore. Like I'm not going to take this personally anymore, for example. And what
Mhm.
comes out of my mouth is going to be based on my second thought. How I behave is going to be based on my second thought. And eventually, over time, you won't never have distorted thinking. You will probably always have that. Like in the beginning of recovery, when I started learning how dishonest I was, I kept having the impulse to lie and I couldn't discern any reason. It was like a habit for me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my God, I'm still having this impulse to lie. And like, I would say now it's like once a year. And I'd be like, where the hell did that come from? Or actually, something that happened to me the other day. This is a body thing. I was in the library and I went to pull out a chair in a corner and I forgot that I wasn't heavy anymore for like a second. I've been at my goal. I'm down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for 8.5 years. And in the beginning, I would frequently, like, always go to the handicap stall in the bathroom because I forgot that I wasn't large anymore. And I had this distorted thought for half a second. I have no idea why. I was like, oh my God, that was weird. I haven't felt that way in a long time. But we have these distorted thoughts. We just
Mhm.
now know that they're not true and we get to examine them.
Yep.
So, if somebody listening believes that there is something fundamentally wrong with them, what would you want them to know?
Um, well, if you think something's fundamentally wrong with you, then that's distorted thinking. That's a perfect
Okay, good.
example of distorted thinking.
Yes,
And distorted thinking can change.
yes.
And it might take time and it might be uncomfortable, but it's possible. And it's kind of like what you said, it's an ongoing process.
Hmm.
And
So,
it's a learned belief, like you said.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, you've
Yeah.
internalized that from somewhere, not from
Yeah.
reality. Yeah. Even if
Yes.
it was somebody telling you you're fundamentally flawed, they're
Right.
wrong.
They're
Yeah.
wrong. Yes.
So, what is one way that your life is more authentically yours than it was 5 years ago?
So I do not live in fear anymore.
Mm.
I make decisions based on what feels right,
Mm.
and I feel competent in my life.
Did
Um,
you say confident or competent?
Competent,
Okay.
and confident, I guess.
Okay.
Um, I don't feel the need to be perfect. I don't feel the need to control. I don't, I can just kind of be myself without all these coping mechanisms that I had adopted over the years to
Mhm.
deal with whatever I was dealing with.
Yeah, it sounds like a much more easeful and relaxing life and peaceful life.
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So if you were to describe like everything you've learned in the last few years of recovery and boundary work and what you've gotten from it in, say, a sentence or two, how would you describe that?
Um, I would say, it's not that I'm a better version of myself, but I'm a more authentic version. and I'm living a life that I choose to live in the
Mm,
way I choose to live. Um, and that doesn't mean that I don't have relationships and get along with people and compromise and all of those things, but I don't compromise fundamentally who I am.
mhm.
And um, and I don't override the things that I know I need to feel safe and secure in the world.
I love it. I love it. So when you said I'm not better, I'm a more authentic version, what I want to share is that when I re put Eileen's email through ChatGPT, what it said was that she doesn't talk about becoming better. She talks about becoming truer. And what resonates on that for me is I almost think I've become a more concentrated version of me. I've let go of the fluff that wasn't really me. I've let go of the masks. And so the essence of Barb is much closer to the surface because there's not all this fake shit around me.
Hmm?
And then you've also said, without using this exact language, is you've stopped overriding yourself
Hmm.
repeatedly so that you could be connected to other people. And you've stopped abandoning yourself so that you could actually discover what is authentic to Eileen. And I think, that's really to me what boundary work is all about. It's about coming more into integrity with yourself, discovering your real identity, understanding where you begin and other people, excuse me, where you end and other people begin, where your responsibility ends and other people's begin.
Yes. And
So
all, yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
So I was going to say, that is like those are all the questions that I wanted to ask you, but I do want to like one of the things I know about you is you had started working on a business and then you realized that you wanted to change what that business was. And the way that you talked to me about it sounded to me like in the process of building the business, you got to know yourself better and be like, you know what? That doesn't really fit me. So are you comfortable sharing with folks a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, that was kind of the outcome of my recovery, really, because when I was married, we decided we wanted to be have a business together. He wanted to have a business. I was going to help him. I like the idea of having our own business. It gives you flexibility. You can, have make your own out, whatever. And so in the end, it turned out very different than I had hoped. But I still thought that was a really interesting idea. And when I first started my recovery work, I did not have the confidence or self-worth or whatever you want to call it to think that I could promote myself and have my own business. And so once I kind of got to the point where I felt like I could do that or close enough, I work as a librarian in a public school. I work with young children, kindergarten, first and second grade. And I started getting interested in screens and how they've affected kids, how they affect families. And I started doing some work with that, educating families, doing presentations, things like that. And I thought I wanted to do one-on-one coaching with families around it. And I even started to do like a certification course and I was working with the therapy group doing that. And I still would like to do it in some way because I think it's an important thing for the world because it's a big problem.
Mhm.
But I found that trying to coach and change the adults' behavior was um, not some that triggered some of my old behaviors and frustrations and resentments and why aren't they listening to me and things like that. So I've kind of circled back to something that I did for many years and that I also think is helpful. And that is helping people organize their life stuff, their paperwork, their finances, their taxes, their all of their stuff, passwords, all the things that kind of make contribute to a stable life. And I tried very hard for in my family to do all those things. And I know that now that I'm kind of have control over all of that stuff on my own, it gives me a great sense of peace. And so I'm kind of leaning towards doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you really got to know yourself better and what was okay and not okay. And it makes me think of I had a sponsee who always wanted to invest in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And so she decided that she was going to actually pursue that with her partner. And they got
Mm-hmm.
halfway through the program and they're like, she was like, wait a minute. I've literally made every decision in my entire life out of fear. And this
Mm-hmm.
wasn't because I wanted to do this. It was because I felt like it's what I needed to do to protect myself, to have stability. And she
Mm-hmm.
let it go. But the only way she knew it was to do it. And the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with you. You know,
Yeah.
like on a
Yeah.
very much smaller scale for me, I took singing lessons early
Mm-hmm.
in recovery and I realized I hate singing lessons. I don't want to sing scales. I don't want to do vocal exercises. I want to sing. And honestly, singing in the car is enough for me, but like you try things and you're like,
Yeah.
nope, it's
Yeah.
not, you're not a failure. You just learn like, but you actually try new things and
Yes.
decide whether you want them or not.
And the thing is, I've always been someone that tried new things, but I used to do it because I lived in so much fear and anxiety, and I did it to prove to myself that I could do it. And
Hmm.
now I don't live in fear and anxiety at all. And I do them now. I'm doing things because I think they're important work for the world and for society and for other people.
Hmm.
And also, I think the important part was not what I was doing, but that I was able to put myself out there with confidence.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we have covered everything I wanted to say. Is there anything that you wanted to make sure that you said today that you haven't had the opportunity to share?
So like I said, I thought I was going to be anxious and fearful my whole life. I just thought that's who I was.
Hmm.
And when I went through recovery, I'm not fearful and anxious anymore. And the other thing is, I had insomnia on and off since I was a child.
Hmm.
And when I started to go through recovery, I started to sleep really well. And I still do for the most part. I have insomnia occasionally,
Hmm.
but I read so much about sleep and there's books about sleep and monitoring your sleep and sleep is this elusive thing I think in our modern world and all of my recovery work really helped me to be able to sleep.
Mm. When you say that, something occurs to me. When I started dating my sweetheart, we've been together for 7.5 years. The first time that he got up in the middle of the night and I woke up and he was gone and I didn't know that he had gotten up, I was blown away because I've always been a super light sleeper. And
Mm-hmm.
then one time he actually took a photo of me, which he showed to me in black and white. He loves but black and white photography. And I was sleeping. I was like, okay, this is evidence. This man is awake when I'm sleeping and I didn't wake up. And I just remember being so shocked by that. And he
Uh-huh.
tells me all the time now, you're a really good sleeper. Because I get up to pee every night,
Uh-huh.
at least twice, if not 3 or 4 times. And he's like, yeah, but you go right back to sleep. And I'm like, wow. Because when I was a kid, or not even just as a kid, my whole life, I was a very, very light sleeper. And I sleep much more soundly now. And I haven't thought about that in a really long time. Yeah.
I think that's the nervous system calming down.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I'm not hyper vigilant all of the
Mm-hmm.
time?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So actually, one thing I did want to say is I know you've mentioned Al-Anon many times, but I happen to know that you have also worked another 12-step recovery program. Are you comfortable saying?
Yes. Well, when
Yeah.
the Al-Anon program was so helpful to me,
Hmm.
that I thought, what else can I do? And I'm also a seeker in general, so I didn't just stay with the Al-Anon program. I listened to other podcasts. I read books. I did a lot for a while. I finally kind of backed off of it, but I did. partly through learning about ACA from Barb. I was in the ACA program. Went to meetings and worked the steps and read the literature. And that was what was really helpful for
Mhm.
me because I left no stone unturned. I had to
Mhm.
understand everything. So
Mhm.
that really helped me to understand my
Mhm.
childhood and my parents and how that impacted me. And it
Mhm.
really helped allowed me to kind of grieve that and grieve the fact that my father's no longer alive. And he would have been someone I could have had some really authentic conversations with, and I won't ever be able to do that. So I think ACA was really helpful for the grief process. It was
Mhm.
also helpful for me to kind of look at my ex-husband's behavior through that lens and what I now understood about his family, and that also helped with the compassion and forgiveness.
Mhm.
Um, and um, so yeah, both of those were really helpful because it's all related. All of that stuff
Yeah.
is related, and
Yeah.
I think it's just you, examining, it's not about criticizing your parents, but it's about understanding how you have the beliefs, came to have the beliefs that you do, and which of those beliefs are distorted. And
Mhm.
so it's really just, I think, understanding your childhood and your upbringing is really about just another angle for self-awareness. And especially if you didn't get what you needed to get, because then, that's where all those behaviors begin.
Yeah, agreed.
So
Well, thank you so much for contributing your experience, strength, and hope of recovery and boundary building with me and with the world. And I know you mentioned that you really are only doing that financial work in person. So um, let's just say that Eileen lives in the Atlanta area. So if you live
mhm.
in the area and you want that kind of help, reach out to me and I will connect you with Eileen. How does that sound, Eileen?
That sounds good. I'm doing it, very much word of mouth. I do
Hmm.
have my first client I'm going to meet with on Sunday.
Hmm.
And I think it's word of mouth because it's a very personal
Oh,
thing.
of course. Yeah, you
And
need to trust
so,
someone.
yes,
Yeah.
you need to trust the person. And I've been working on my money story, which is a big part of my story.
Hmm.
And I am planning to put that on my website so people can read it because this was distorted thinking. Part of my distorted thinking has to do with money.
Hmm.
And just how much shame and just so much emotional baggage people have around money, whether you have it or you don't.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed.
So,
All
yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much for your
You're
time.
welcome. This was
Alrighty.
great.
Thank you,
Thank you for
everybody.
having me.
Yes, thanks for
Okay.
listening. Stop recording. Have you ever walked away from a conversation wondering, why did I say yes? Or agreed to do something you didn't want to do, even though you knew better in the moment? That's what I call overriding yourself. You don't betray yourself because you're weak. You betray yourself because in the moment, it feels safer to disappoint yourself than someone else. That is the pattern I help people change. My new course, Boundaries That Hold: How to Stop Overriding Yourself in Real Time, teaches you how to build internal safety that makes healthy boundaries possible. Early access is open now, so you can get immediate access to the first materials and lock in the lowest price before the full course launches. I'd love for you to join us. higherpowercc.com/boundaries that hold. Thanks for listening. If something here resonated, come connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Barb Nangle. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. And if you'd like support building healthier boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, you can book a free 30-minute Say No Without Guilt consultation at barbchat.net.